Riding in style. The luxurious trains of the 20th century were as stunning as they were functional. The train industry spent millions making their rail cars one-of-a-kind masterpieces, designed by some of the United States' premier artists in an attempt to dominate the upstart airline industry. Let's look back at these ornate machines and how they came to be. Train travel was once the pinnacle of transportation for Americans looking to cross the country for business or vacation. These rail cars offered modern luxuries, impressive even by today's standards. As competition in the transportation industry grew with the advent of commercial airlines and continued improvements to automobiles, the railroad industry fought to lure passengers back by offering an elevated travel experience. Thanks to the invention of the steam engine, trains had become the most popular form of transportation. Between 1896 and 1916, ridership on the American rail system tripled, and by 1910, trains were responsible for carrying 95% of all intercity transportation. By 1920, rail travel in the United States reached its peak, and passenger rail cars were responsible for carrying 1.2 billion passengers annually. As a comparison, this is 38 times more people than the 31 million passengers Amtrak carried in 2017. The railroad system opened the door for travel to many Americans, and as train ridership increased and passengers became more comfortable using the train, the demand for more upscale experiences emerged. Compared to the treacherous journey out west by carriage or horseback, steam locomotive-pulled passenger trains became an attractive option for cross-country commuters. The steam locomotive transformed a trip that would have taken multiple weeks of hard travel into a relatively comfortable trip covering the same distance within a matter of days. The Pullman Company, founded by George M. Pullman in the 19th century, operated sleeping cars on most of the railroads in the United States. There was a variety of fares depending on the type of accommodation passengers wanted, from grand drawing rooms to smaller roomettes, which only accommodated one person.
So on board one of the Pullman sleeping cars, you'd find all kinds of various accommodations. You'd find family rooms, which would have been called a drawing room. You have double bedrooms, which would have been designed for couples, or you had the single rooms, which were a roomette, and those were for businessmen or single travelers. But everybody always remembers Marilyn Monroe when she was in the upper berth of an open section sleeping car in her famous movie, Some Like It Hot.
Though travel by rail began as a cost-effective means of transportation for the nation, it slowly transformed into an opportunity for passengers to indulge in luxury travel. In 1910, a standard double-berth accommodation, similar to bunk beds, cost $12 from St. Paul to Seattle on the Northern Pacific Railway. Northern Pacific's North Coast Limited even offered a barber shop aboard that charged 45 cents for a shave and 50 cents for a haircut or a hot bath. On some trains, such as the Chicago-San Francisco-California Zephyr, female car hosts, or Zephyrettes, helped passengers by answering questions, booking dinner reservations, making announcements, and even filling in as babysitters. Popularity of riding in style grew so much that trains like Santa Fe Railroad's Super Chief Streamliner, which became known as the Turquoise Room, began attracting high-profile Hollywood celebrities.
Its most notable famous person is Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra would travel aboard the Cedar Rapids with his group when he was traveling in the Midwest. And of course, it was a car that was available to all the customers, just like the first class section on an aircraft. So he would buy up all 24 seats in the car and pay a whopping $2.25 per seat so that he could have the car exclusively for him and his group.
Another modern amenity offered to passengers aboard these luxury trains was air conditioning. Prior to air conditioning, the only way to cool trains was by opening windows. Railroads were anxious to promote air conditioning as a means of cooling the train and keeping passengers happy. Ultimately, their efforts in promoting this service helped to popularize the luxury. But there was one amenity that surpassed all others aboard these rail cars. cars, the dining service, which was equivalent to that of a fine restaurant.
Cooking aboard a train is really a fine art. Of course, first of all, a lot of it has to do with the product that you're going to serve and how it's being presented. The railroads prided themselves on local cuisine that was from their territory or their region. So on the Northern Pacific, they might serve rainbow trout. On the Great Northern, they were known for their baked potato. Of course, you're cooking in a very small, confined space, but all very specific high-end items. On the Milwaukee Road, they did things like the grilled cheese that they were famous for, or deviled eggs. And each railroad had various cuisine that they would choose from their territory that they operated in.
With all these services to offer, railroads advertised heavily in magazines, on radio, and in newspapers to attract passengers for vacations or to experience the country in style. Several Western railroads served national parks such as Yellowstone, Glacier, and Grand Canyon, and heavily promoted traveling to them, often via colorful posters distributed nationwide. They also promoted special tours to the parks, with the railroads handling all aspects of the planning, including off-train transportation and hotel accommodations. Railroads even affiliated themselves with specific parks in order to attract passengers. Northern Pacific Railroad called itself the Yellowstone Park Line, while the Santa Fe Railway was known as the Grand Canyon Line. Great Northern Railway was one of the chief promoters of Glacier National Park in Montana, lobbying Congress for its creation and then building lodges in the park to handle guests who arrived via Great Northern passenger trains. Railroads invested heavily in advertising and restoring their luxury trains, along with purchasing more rail cars. In 1947, the Great Northern Railway spent $7 million to re-equip its Chicago to St. Paul, Minneapolis to Seattle, Portland Empire Builder with 60 new streamlined cars. A little over 4 years later, the Great Northern spent another $12 million on the Empire Builder. Despite the railroad's efforts to encourage their riders to indulge in this newfound luxury travel, the cost of upkeep and maintenance for luxurious rail cars became unsustainable for the industry.
It's a little bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you get to one end, you start all over again at the other end. But generally speaking, we here restore our cars in 6 to 8 months, and that includes completely gutting them out to the exterior walls, new windows, new wall coverings, new woodwork, flooring, and then adding upgraded restrooms. So it really can take 6 to 8 months, but it's always a work in progress.
Not only is the restoration of these cars expensive, it also requires individuals with specialized skill sets. In 2014, the Friends of the 261 rebuilt a luxury rail car from the Hiawatha Streamliner. The car, named Cedar Rapids, is a skytop parlor lounge with observation windows in the back of the car. The Friends crew installed new window glass, repaired and reupholstered the parlor car chairs, and replaced the wood ceiling. The interior and exterior of the car was painted, and electrical updates were added, along with many other lengthy refurbishments.
Our skytop observation, which was built in 1948, was designed by Brooks Stevens, who was a famous industrial designer in the Milwaukee area. He was commissioned by the Milwaukee Road to try to generate a rail car that would basically put the airline industry to bed. The airline industry was just starting out at the time, and traveling by airplane was loud, laborious, uncomfortable, and actually it was fairly time-consuming to fly from Chicago to St. Paul because the plane made frequent stops in La Crosse and Madison and along the route. So the rail industry thought, we can put the airline industry out of business, and we'll design a very nice, sleek, modern, beautiful train which people will prefer to ride over taking the airline.
Innovations such as the interstate highway and the popularity of the jet plane played a significant role in the decline of train ridership towards the second half of the 20th century. Though ridership was at its peak in the United States during the 1920s, the Great Depression caused ridership to steeply decline in the 1930s. It briefly became popular once more during World War II due to gasoline rationing and a rubber tire shortage. shortage. However, after the end of the war, passenger train travel began declining once again. Railroads tried relentlessly to build on the renewed energy for train passage by investing in new streamliners and adding dome cars to their trains in the 1940s and 50s. However, private automobiles and publicly funded roads rapidly diminished railroad passenger service, as did the popularity and excitement surrounding the jet airplane. Passenger trains were expensive to operate, and with other affordable options emerging, it became less reasonable to maintain the crews necessary for these aging trains. Furthermore, in the 1960s, the post office introduced the zip code and diverted mail from passenger trains to airlines, which caused a loss of revenue and drove up passenger train costs. In 1971, the government created Amtrak to take over the few remaining passenger trains in the United States. Slowly, the passenger train and luxury rail car experience became functionally obsolete in our modernizing world. Each year, dozens of luxury private cars operate on Amtrak lines, and occasionally Amtrak will partner with special charter trains to run on their routes. The charter trains can operate with all private cars or a mix of Amtrak and private cars. A variety of railroad museums, historical groups, and private owners purchase and restore dozens of vintage rail cars each year. For more information on the restoration of luxury rail cars, please click on the links in the video's description and take a journey with us through this unique era of travel.